Hello and welcome to Community Topics number 31 of Dualistic Unity. I am not settling on the idea that I have any fucking idea how deep this shit goes anymore. I was just telling Ray that funny the last maybe a year ago I would get caught, and even less than that, in saying things like, "Oh, I think I'm seeing things really clearly now. I think I'm really starting to get this." And then I was saying that every couple of weeks. It's like hit me harder and harder and harder, and to where I'm at a point now where I was saying something similar, like, but I know that's not it. So it's not even worth sometimes saying, "Oh, I think I'm getting clear." It's like that's just it. We're always in that process of unraveling whatever the fuck it is.
Out of habit, I would say, more than anything else, because we don't recognize necessarily what we're doing because of how we translate it after the fact. It's very much like you have a conversation and then afterwards you think about that conversation and the conversation becomes something that it wasn't when it was happening. Now you're perceiving it in a certain way because of how you perceive yourself. And so the experience changes after the fact. But during the conversation was what it was. It's just what you do afterwards when you're thinking about yourself. But the reality is, things are what they are. You are what you are. That said, let's pick that apart. This Community Topics episode is about deconstructing too far. What that means, what we're deconstructing, who's deconstructing it, all of that stuff. And so we're going to get into that. I'm going to pass it to Andrew straight away, and then we're going to see where this goes from there.
All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna go with basically the only thought. I didn't hardly think about this at all leading up to this. There's just one thing that hit me as soon as this was talked about and brought up, and for me, it sounds like a big old ego trip. The thought that you could deconstruct too far. It's like that's really egotistical to think, oh, I think I've gone too far. I think I've let go of too much. I've just let go of so many things, and now I'm in a place that's I don't know what this is, and have I gone too far? So even the concern of that is settling upon something, settling upon an idea, settling upon a judgment of whatever it is. And we were talking throughout our calls today in our live stream and Patreon calls about the reality of letting go and what's possible with that. And every time you think like, oh, can I let go of it all? Your ego comes right back a running. It's like, no, of course not. What about all this? What about all of that? What about all of these things? Like, ask yourself right now, can I let go of everything? And just see what comes up, just out of curiosity. See what comes up. Can I let go of myself completely? And just listen to that voice, listen to that story, listen to that identity, ego, whatever you want to call it. Come right back up. It's real noisy when you start doing that because it knows that's it that you're letting go of. The illusion, the perception of division that never actually was, but it's something we perceive. So anyway, that's where I'm starting it.
That's great. Absolutely. Because it matters where we're coming from, right? Like you can try to deconstruct your concepts to get to freedom, but that's a concept. And so it's like a dog chasing its own tail. You're never going to stop as long as you're chasing. So it's not about deconstructing to get to a place of freedom. It's about experiencing freedom. Now, immediately the ego is going to go, oh, so I'm going to go from here to total freedom, and that's your ego. But the question is, are you tired of suffering? And if you're tired of suffering, then just a little bit less ego, a little bit less suffering, a little bit less of the illusion of control is enough to entice you in that direction. So you relax, you entertain the possibility that you can, in fact, just let go. And for a moment, as you're entertaining that possibility, you get a glimpse of what it's like to let go. You relax a little bit, and there an insight pops up about why you haven't been letting go. And that's the deconstruction process. It comes from the experience of freedom. It doesn't go towards the experience of freedom. You relax, You have an insight. That insight reminds you why you weren't relaxed. And then you don't have to worry about remembering it. You've had the insight, you've seen it, you'll see it again. And then the next insight comes along because you have that foundation. But if you're trying to deconstruct concepts to get to a concept of freedom, you're never going to go anywhere. You're always going to be just left in concepts. And then you're going to end up in this weird, uncertain reality where you're just awash of all of this stuff. And you're like, what do I look at? And that is overwhelming. And that's when you start to feel like I've deconstructed too far. You haven't deconstructed too far. You've deconstructed with the wrong intention. Even right now, you're trying to deconstruct everything that you're looking at, but just put it down. See, it's nice. All that stuff is in there, but it's not the point. The point is where you are. Relax. All of a sudden, you'll have an insight. That's the point. Don't go chasing freedom. It's not what you think it is. Ever.
Yeah, because if you are deconstructing in order to get somewhere, that's just it. That's what you reference in the intention there, because that's just striving towards another prison. Like your concept of freedom is a prison. And so if you're striving to get to freedom, you're striving to get to another prison. And so your idea of what's at the end of the deconstructing process is not what it is. It never is. And yet we create this ideal, like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the pearly fucking gates up in heaven with Sky Daddy. And they're all just concepts. They're all just ideas of what we think freedom is, but it's not the reality of it, because freedom isn't a concept. It's not your idea. Any idea that you cling to isn't it. And so we continue to go through the process of questioning. And if there's that twang of desire to get somewhere, as opposed to almost just being fulfilling in itself as you go, then it's going to feel like, oh, I don't know about this, because you're not being where you're at. You're not enjoying or appreciating the process of deconstruction because it's a means to an end. It's just another means to an end, which is what we've done our whole life, which is the only process that the ego knows. It's carrot and stick, because that's a carrot. That idea of whatever it is that you're deconstructing in order to get to is a carrot. So you're just in the same mentality you always have been. That back and forth with the ego, striving to get somewhere. Because the process of deconstructing, or whatever words you want to use for it, questioning, letting go, is fulfilling in and of itself as you go. Each one, you're taking out some of the weight. But if you have the perception that you're on a journey to get to a place, to get to an ideal, to get to a concept, to get to that state of enlightenment or nirvana or peace or freedom or whatever it is, like you're letting go of things as you go and adding things through expectation of where you're getting to as you go. So really you're kind of netting out at zero in terms of dropping the weight, because you're maintaining the expectation where you think it's going to get you.
If you meet the Buddha in the road, kill it. As soon as you think you have the right concept, the right idea, the right path, anything, get rid of that, because there's still a you that has the right path, that has the right concept, that can lose the way. And that in itself is a source of stress. So, as we've always said, keep it light. And what I mean by that is recognize that you can take all of this stuff in terms of all the concepts. You can question them in your own due time. But it really just comes down to your experience right now. None of the concepts are going to get you to somewhere. It's your relationship with yourself right now that is really what all of this is about. That's really all it's about. You can go down the path of spirituality or atheism or science. It does not matter. It comes down to you trying to solve that uncertainty problem that you can never solve, by finding something that tells you what everything is, instead of coming down to the fact that you're just afraid. And that's okay. It's okay to be afraid. But it's the fear that's making you want to get somewhere. You're running from it instead of just accepting that you're afraid, that it is a part of existence. That as much as there is a part of you that is joy, there is a part of you that is fear. Doesn't mean anything about you. See, and that's the point. It doesn't mean anything about you. The journey doesn't actually add anything to your value. All you're doing is shifting through perspectives. But those perspectives have a greater or lesser consequence based on how much they reinforce the illusion of you. That's it. See, as long as you just recognize you're chasing nothing, you're chasing a fiction that's keeping you chasing, and you have a moment, you just breathe, go, okay, maybe I don't need to get anywhere. Maybe I just need to sit through this. Immediately, you've taken off some weight. And when that weight comes off, you have more processing power. You have more space to breathe. You have a chance at having an insight. But as long as you're wrapped up in this idea of yourself, you can't see anything but that. And so if you're afraid of it, that's all you see. That's all you see. And so you keep wanting to escape, and that reinforces it. You keep wanting to escape, and that reinforces it, instead of recognizing that it is as strong as you are. This is why I always caution people about coping mechanisms.
Yeah, you don't have to solve the fear. That one hit me just now when you said that. You don't have to solve the fear, because the fear is what we're always trying to solve. Like, we're always utilizing something in order to solve that fear that's reinforcing the root. And we don't see the root, so we just see the fear. And once that's, dealt with temporarily, we're like, oh, we did it. I did it. Okay, cool. And then it just comes right back with even more force, with even more fucking vengeance. But the fear is a part of it. It's a part of the experience. When you understand that the fear is not something you have to solve, it's not something you have to overcome, it's not something you have to cling to something in order to feel better about it. It's just fully an aspect of experience. It's fully a part of it until you recognize that it doesn't have quite the force anymore, until you start to face that root a little bit more often. And then it's not so much an aspect of it. But in order to find that root, you have to become okay with dealing with the fear, with letting go of the idea that it shouldn't be. Because that just, it's like if the fear is a plant and the root is perception of division, identity and all of that. It's like every coping mechanism is allowing us to not deal with the fear, or allowing us to feel better about the fear. But then it's like we're giving food to the root every single time, because every single coping mechanism reinforces the thing, your idea of yourself, that we're using to feel a little bit better. But that's the root. That's where the fear is coming from. So it's exactly that. The dog chasing its tail, as you said. Holy shit. It's so interesting. So initially, as a byproduct of facing that root over and over and over, the fear quiets. It's not quite so powerful. But until then, in order to begin to face the root, like, you have to be okay with the fear. Like, you have to let go of the idea that it could be solved using all of these things, affirmations, coping mechanisms, whatever it may be. You have to be willing to drop that to see what the root even is, to begin digging in. It's like the plant, the plant's above the ground, the roots are below the ground. You keep avoiding the plant. So there's no way to dig into the root there. You have to be willing to become okay with that plant and face it and be like, yeah, all right, I'm not gonna run from this, not gonna turn my head, not gonna cope with it. I'm gonna dig in to it, see where this is coming from, get a little bit curious about why you're feeling this fear all the time. And then you can get closer to the plant, close enough to dig a little bit and dig into it and see what those roots are, see where this is coming from. But when we get caught up in the coping mechanisms with the use of the process of deconstructing in order to get to a state, in order to just use as another coping mechanism, it's reinforcing that. And so there's going to be that fear that keeps coming up as we go until we understand that it's a fulfilling process in and of itself. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's just it. And that it is you.
Well said. Absolutely. It's not about running from the fear. It's about being naked in front of it. And this is what I was trying to say about the experience of mushrooms versus LSD. And I know I had a lot of people get very upset about that, which was really funny to me that they were protecting LSD and telling me that it was just as effective in killing their ego. That was hilarious. The point that I was making is that on mushrooms, you are still very much aware of your insecurities. You can't run from them. They pop up, but you have this wonderful state of mind where you can just relax past them. And usually that is the process of the quote unquote peak, is you working through all of the stuff that you habitually usually cope with, think about, or try to hide from. And instead of doing any of that, you just go, right, I see where that's coming from. And you have an insight and you put it down. And that's the process of deconstruction. It's just done way faster under the influence of mushrooms because there's that loss of control. There's that loss of the narrative to a very large degree. And so we can do that all the time in just surrendering the narrative. See what I'm saying? It's not about the concepts. It's about the experience of just being here now to whatever depth you can accomplish it. Because whatever depth you accomplish it will influence the type of insight that you have. So then the journey just becomes getting deeper and deeper and deeper into reality here and now, not deconstructing concepts, being here. But you see, that's the point. A lot of us don't want to be here. We want to stay in our head because that gives us some sense of control over how we feel. The alternative is to just feel. And that means feeling the entire process of everything we've ever been. It means feeling all of the reactions that formed from our trauma and processing them as they happen rather than running from them, rather than identifying with them and perpetuating them, but to actually just recognize it's going to process its way through you. This is not something that you need to sit there and look back at your life and try to pick apart childhood memories. You are the same person you've been. It's just that you've accumulated experiences along the way. You are the process of deconstruction as you gain more context. It doesn't require you to conceptually deconstruct. You are the process of deconstruction. You are literally always processing information and you're always taking in more context. But that doesn't mean the idea of you. That means what you are. And the more wrapped up you are in the conceptual practice of deconstruction, the more wrapped up you are in the conceptual you.
So it's as you're kind of saying, it's almost as if deconstruction is just the natural process that happens when you're just here now and you're okay with that. And you're not trying to escape, you're not trying to deal with something. It's just what happens. Like it's not even something you have to do. Like we think of deconstruction as something like today I'm going to spend 3 hours deconstructing myself. And it's like, who is exactly? Who's spending 3 hours? Because it's what happens. It's kind of like being attentive to the subconscious happening. You know, that thing being built is allowed to be built, as we talked about earlier in season 4, when you're not attentive to where you're at. It's like it's getting built because you're not paying attention. You're looking at all these other places, thinking you should be somewhere else, worrying about some past shit that happened, getting caught up in the future. So deconstruction is no different. It's like just that process of being where you're at and being okay with whatever arises in that space. And like that's kind of it.
Right. It's funny because the ego wants to take ownership and say that I'm deconstructing all of these things and getting somewhere and doing all that. But deconstruction in reality is really just the process of us recognizing habitual scapegoats and recognizing the consequence of them. And then we change, and our ego rationalizes that as I've learned something. But it's just the ongoing process of change, which is what we are.
Yeah. Goddamn ego, always trying to take ownership for fucking everything, including deconstructing. Like it really is just something that's always happening when we're attentive to where we're at, when we're tending to the garden, as they say. It's like that. It's so many things are allowed to happen, including deconstruction, like letting go, whatever. Like there's probably 100 things we could name that happens when you're just being where you're at without trying to get somewhere else or without a need to be somewhere else or a thought that you should be somewhere else. It's not that you're doing anything because that's who's taking that. It's just the ego wanting to say I'm doing this. So when you let go of that, then it's just what's allowed to happen. It's like we're always that fucking bottleneck to the situation. We're always that cap. Just the idea of us, the idea that we know where we should be. We know what's happening. I know what should be happening and where I should be. But now, as you let go of all of that, relax into that uncertainty, it's like the cap opens and all of those things, the deconstruction, the healing, the whatever you want to say, is allowed to occur because it's not you. And then as soon as you come back and say, like, I'm deconstructing, it's just cap back on. No more of that.
It's interesting, the parallel when you think about it, because we always tend to think about the mind and the body as separate things, but the mind and the body are one. There's no separation whatsoever, right? And so we will acknowledge that relaxing our body allows it to do what it will naturally do otherwise, which is to thrive and grow and heal. But when we stress it out, we get in the way of all of that. It's very much like trying to pay attention how you walk. Immediately you start thinking about, is this the right way? Are people looking at me? Anything like that. And your walk gets totally weird. It feels totally foreign. And why? Because you're interfering with what would otherwise be happening anyway. That's the point. And it happens all the time, exactly like that. And so just as the body heals when we get out of the way and allow it to relax and allow it to be fluid, allow it to regenerate and be present, the mind is no different. And we call that process of healing deconstruction, which is what slows it down, gets in the way, because now we're owning it. And the very thing that we think is doing the deconstructing is the thing that we were deconstructing up until that point.
Isn't it funny how we'll talk about these things? Like the idea of deconstruction gets in the way of the reality of deconstruction. Always. The idea is always fuck it. It fucks it so hard. The thoughts fuck it. Thoughts are always fuck. They always fuck everything up, man. But it's so interesting. Like no matter what the thing, no matter what the action process thing, the reality of it versus the concept of it, it's almost always that the concept of it gets in the way of the reality of it. Almost always, if not just always, because ideas always get in the way. Ideas aren't it. The idea of deconstruction is not the reality of deconstruction, and clinging to the action of deconstructing, of peeling yourself back, of anything really like that, that I'm fuck, is it even I'm letting go? Is it even oh shit. Oh, because that's who's letting go. Exactly. And of damn it. That's funny. Ah.
And that right there is why I stopped my YouTube channel. That is why I went away and started working on it myself. What I was working on wasn't the process of deconstructing the universe. It was shutting the fuck up. It was being the universe, watching where I was in conflict with things, watching where I was, I had opinions that were creating consequences for me, and then being honest enough to recognize that it was because of my fear or my arrogance or my need for control. It's just self-honesty. We call it deconstruction, but it's just relaxing enough to just let an insight happen. But to do that, you need to be honest enough to recognize you're not here to save anyone. Right? There's nothing important about this path except to you. There's nothing important about this path except to you. It's not about telling anyone else. It's not about getting them to believe anything else. It's just about you. And what that means is that it comes down to this experience that you're having right now. It's not about some mystical journey to the future. It's about this experience that you're having right now. And there is no concept or deconstruction process that's going to take you anywhere. You're already here. You are quite literally the here and now. There is nowhere to go. What are you deconstructing other than your resistance to what I just said?
Amen. Amen. Because like in states of clarity, it's things like that are so obvious. Like what we get caught up in this idea of, oh, I'm deconstructing, I'm on this, journey of doing something that very much involves like I've been on it for a while, I'm going into it in the future. It's like you've never not been here now. Here and now is the reality of you. So nothing could possibly happen outside of here now. So that whole fucking journey that you're on, the path towards enlightenment, or whatever other bullshit word you come up with for all that stuff, isn't it? Because that's all that implies something else. And so it's just another way to escape the reality that you're here now, that this is it. Anytime we have the fucking idea of a path or a journey, it's just another way to avoid, the recognition that here and now is the extent of you, which there's a lot too, but there's so many ways that we avoid it. And so that path of deconstruction, that idea that you could even deconstruct too far, is just another scapegoat. It's just another way to avoid the reality of what deconstruction actually is, or the reality of where it is actually allowed to happen when you let go of the idea that you're deconstructing anything.
And that's the funny part, is that we have the experience of deconstruction. Your ego will always say it's deconstructing this. Andrew and I have often talked about the fact that we see things clearer every step along the way, so on and so forth. You're like, well, obviously you're doing something. No, but we experience it like we are, right? We experience it like it's separate from everything else, but it's not. So we're already being what we are and basically just talking about the deepening experience of that, of what we already are. It's kind of like sitting on a beach, appreciating the sunrise, just talking about the sunrise. We're not trying to get to the sun. We're just appreciating the sunrise, right? And that's really all this conversation is meant to be, right? Is an appreciation. And that in itself is also affecting the collective, because you allowing yourself to deconstruct the division that you habitually create also makes your interaction with the rest of the habitual division that we habitually create change. And that is how you become us deconstructing on another level. It's not by trying, it's not by convincing anyone, it's by being here now. So everybody who interacts with you is interacting with you here now. And that makes it far more difficult for them to hold on to their resistance to being here now.
Well said. You can appreciate the sunrise without trying to get to the fucking sun. I love that one. And that's it. That's just it. It's already happening. You're already it. You're already deconstructing whatever when you recognize, or at least let go of the idea that you are. Because what is there to deconstruct besides the idea that you're doing anything? Really.
That's it. We have nothing else to add, because you see, that's the point. This was a great episode where we're describing all of this fun stuff that really just, at the end of the day, really just means you're not going anywhere. Be here now. Enjoy yourself. Relax. Stop taking it so seriously. Stop taking yourself so seriously. Keep it light. Go for a walk. Enjoy your life for what it is right now. There's nowhere to go, and the rest unfolds. But the more you do that, the more it unfolds. As soon as you start stressing about the deconstruction process, you're basically slamming on the brakes. Just remember that you don't have to. You can let go. Let's see where it goes.
This has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed this one. I was serious when I came into this, just saying I wanted to get that first bit out. Deconstructing too far sounds like a fucking ego trip and a half, which we kind of circled around that. That was like the only thing I had written down. It was just ego trip, always more. Those were the 4 words that I had written down on my notebook for this episode, and I knew, it was gonna go somewhere, and so this is a fun one. But I'm glad we made this, because there's a lot of concern for this, and yeah, the process of deconstruction just gets in the way of the reality of it, which is fucking hilarious.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for us. We are off to the retreat. I do want to mention to everyone who isn't on Patreon, because they already know, that there are already 3 community topics episodes that have been pre-recorded that are going to be released in the week that we are gone. So I'm looking forward to everybody's feedback on that. Do just keep it light. Enjoy your life. That's really all this is about. And we will see you in approximately 10 to 11 days in one of our Patreon groups. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.